Have you ever wondered why everything suddenly went silent in your life? Why the people you once relied on faded into the background? Why doors that once opened easily now seem sealed shut? And why you're left alone, utterly alone, with nothing but your own thoughts echoing back at you? It feels cruel, doesn't it? As though life has exiled you without reason, like you're being punished. But what if this silence, this solitude, is not abandonment, but an invitation? Not a prison, but a passage. The universe has not forsaken you. It has isolated you for a reason. True growth often begins in solitude. When the noise of the world fades, the soul begins to speak. This is not a romantic notion. It is a psychological reality. We spend much of our lives embedded in external systems, education, work, relationships, societal roles. While these frameworks provide structure, they often prevent us from hearing the quieter truths that reside within. Our attention is fragmented, constantly pulled outward. We mirror others, react to their expectations, adopt identities not always chosen by us, but imposed. In this external absorption, we rarely pause to ask, who am I when I am not performing? Isolation interrupts this pattern. When we are suddenly removed from the usual rhythm of connection and obligation, the surface-level self, what some might call the ego, no longer has its usual playground. In this vacuum, something deeper begins to stir. At first, the silence is deafening. It feels like emptiness, loss, even punishment. But slowly, the absence of distraction makes space for a new kind of awareness. Thoughts that were buried beneath noise rise to the surface. Emotions once numbed by busyness become vivid. And most importantly, we begin to observe ourselves. Not as roles, not as images projected onto a social screen, but as raw, unfiltered beings. It is in this state that the real work of self-discovery begins. We start to notice patterns in our thinking. Perhaps we realize we've been carrying beliefs that were never truly ours, or that we've been living according to fears we never dared confront. In solitude, the mask slips. Without the social mirror constantly reflecting back who we're expected to be, we start to question the authenticity of our actions, our desires, our choices. This can be terrifying. It requires honesty, the kind that cannot be avoided when there's no one else around to distract or validate us. But this is where growth begins, because to truly know oneself, one must first be willing to meet oneself. And that meeting rarely happens in the comfort of company. It happens in silence, often in pain, and always in stillness. The questions that arise in isolation, who am I? What do I want? Why do I suffer? Are the questions that initiate transformation. They demand reflection, and more than that, they demand courage. The courage to sit in discomfort. The courage to face what one has hidden. And the courage to accept whatever truths surface. Paradoxically, isolation also connects us to something greater. When the external world falls away and the inner world is laid bare, we begin to sense the presence of something more eternal. Call it soul, psyche, essence, or spirit. It is the part of us untouched by time, society, or circumstance. It is the part of us that remembers why we came here, what we long to become, and what we must do next. Isolation doesn't separate us from meaning, it delivers us to it, but only if we are willing to listen. And listening, in the deepest sense, is the first step toward becoming whole. Being alone forces confrontation with the shadow, the unacknowledged parts of ourselves. This is the beginning of inner integration. In our day-to-day lives, we often exist within roles, expectations, and carefully curated images of who we are supposed to be. These images are reinforced by social interactions, habits, routines, and the constant presence of others who confirm our sense of identity. But much of this identity is constructed, not discovered. It is shaped to be acceptable, pleasing, or powerful in the eyes of others. In this performance, we cast certain parts of ourselves aside, the fears we refuse to admit, the impulses we disown, the memories we bury, the traits we are ashamed of. These disowned parts do not disappear. They become the shadow. The shadow is not inherently evil or dangerous. It simply contains everything we have rejected, denied, or failed to accept. Often these are deeply human traits: anger, jealousy, insecurity, vulnerability, even creativity or sensitivity. They have been pushed into the unconscious because they didn't fit the persona we developed to survive or succeed in society. But the unconscious is not silent. It waits, and when we are alone, truly alone, the noise that kept the shadow hidden begins to fade. That's when the shadow steps forward. In isolation, the mirror of society is removed. There is no one to impress, no one to deceive, and no one to distract us from our own internal contradictions. The discomfort that arises is not just about loneliness. It is about confrontation. Suddenly, you notice the anxiety that was always there, masked by social busyness. You feel the weight of old wounds you never gave yourself time to grieve: anger, regret, resentment. These emotions float up not because they were newly born, but because you finally became still enough to hear them. This is not a breakdown, it is an unveiling. Shadow work begins here. It is not an intellectual exercise. It is not solved by reading, affirmations, or rationalizations. It is emotional, raw, and deeply personal. It requires you to acknowledge the very parts of yourself you wish weren't there, to sit with guilt without rushing to justify it, to hold your pain without demanding someone else fix it, to feel rage without projecting it onto another, to ask where these things came from, who hurt you, what shaped you, why you responded the way you did, and to do so without judgment. This is the alchemy of solitude. It turns hidden fragments into conscious awareness. And this awareness is essential. You cannot heal what you refuse to see. You cannot grow while denying the truth of your inner landscape. When you allow yourself to meet your shadow, you begin to reclaim the pieces of yourself that have been lost or locked away. This process is messy, but it is meaningful, because in integrating what was once disowned, you move closer to wholeness. You move closer to wholeness. You no longer operate as a fractured being, running from yourself. You begin to live from a place of truth, strength, and authenticity that only emerges when you stop pretending and start embracing the full spectrum of your humanity. The universe communicates through symbols and synchronicities. Isolation is not random. It's a message, a metaphor, an invitation. In the ordinary flow of life, we are rarely taught to interpret our experiences symbolically. We tend to approach events with a cause and effect mindset. This happened because of that, we reason, and we search for linear explanations. But beneath the surface of what we call reality lies a deeper pattern, one that doesn't follow logic but meaning. In times of isolation, when we are disconnected from familiar systems and routines, we become more sensitive to these patterns. What once seemed like coincidence begins to carry weight. The things we notice, the dreams we have, the random memories that resurface, these become carriers of hidden truths. When the external world quiets down, the symbolic realm becomes louder. For example, one might begin to notice recurring numbers, specific animals, phrases overheard in a passing conversation, or even books that seem to find you at exactly the right moment. These are not accidents. They are synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that reflect the inner state of the psyche. They serve as bridges between the conscious mind and the deeper, unconscious processes unfolding beneath. In isolation, the veil that separates the visible from the invisible grows thinner. We begin to feel that life is speaking to us, not through words, but through images, patterns, and metaphors. To understand this communication, one must adopt a different lens, a symbolic one. Let's say a person in isolation begins to dream of being lost in a forest. To a literalist, this is just a strange dream, but symbolically, the forest might represent the unknown terrain of the inner self. Being lost could signify the loss of a familiar identity, the feeling of being adrift after separation from societal roles. The dream becomes a message from the deeper self, trying to guide the conscious mind through a psychological transition. The same is true for waking life. If in solitude you begin to feel drawn to old memories, certain pieces of music, or distant longings, these are not distractions. They are symbols pointing toward unresolved aspects of the soul. Isolation is often the stage upon which the symbolic life begins to unfold. In the absence of distractions, the psyche finds the space to express itself more clearly. Every experience, from the silence of a room to the flicker of a candle, can become a metaphor for something deeper. The loneliness itself might symbolize the birth canal of transformation, a narrowing before expansion. The pain might symbolize the shedding of an old identity. The confusion might symbolize the chaos necessary before new order emerges. To approach isolation symbolically is to see that it has purpose, structure, and language. You are not just alone. You are in a sacred space where the universe speaks in symbols that bypass the intellect and touch the soul. This way of seeing transforms everything. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What is this trying to show me?" That single shift opens a path to understanding that can never be found in noise. The universe does not shout. It whispers in signs, patterns, and mirrors. And when you are isolated, you are finally still enough to see the messages it has been sending you all along. Isolation often signifies the end of an old identity. What feels like loss is preparation for psychological rebirth. Human beings are creatures of identity. From early childhood, we construct an image of ourselves based on the feedback we receive, the roles we play, and the values we absorb. Over time, this identity solidifies into a kind of psychological armor. It helps us navigate the world, but it also confines us. We begin to equate our worth with our function, our belonging with our performance, our value with our visibility. And then, one day, sometimes suddenly, sometimes slowly, we are removed from the context in which that identity was formed. We find ourselves alone, disconnected, uncertain. The life we once knew no longer fits. The people, roles, titles, and routines that once defined us are gone or fading. This loss can feel devastating. But beneath the grief, something profound is happening. The ego, the part of the psyche that holds our conscious sense of self, is experiencing a kind of death, not physical, but symbolic. It is the unraveling of who we thought we were to make room for who we are meant to become. In psychological terms, this is not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. Isolation serves as the crucible for this transformation. It removes the mirrors that once reflected a false or limited image of ourselves and forces us to face the raw, unshaped reality beneath. This confrontation is painful because it threatens the foundation of our known self. Yet it is necessary, because growth demands that something old be sacrificed for something new to emerge. This is why isolation often comes during periods of deep transition, a loss, a betrayal, a failure, a personal reckoning. These moments strip away the external scaffolding and leave us exposed. Without our titles, our roles, our distractions, we are brought face to face with our essence. And that essence is not yet fully formed. It is in process, in flux. The old has died, the new has not yet arrived. This in-between space is deeply uncomfortable, but it is also sacred. It is the psychological equivalent of the chrysalis, a container for metamorphosis. Many resist this stage. They try to escape the discomfort by rushing back into distraction, by reattaching to old patterns, or by numbing the pain. But those who choose to remain, to sit in the uncertainty, to feel the disintegration without fleeing it, are the ones who undergo true transformation. They begin to shed not just the surface layers, but the deeper illusions that kept them bound. They begin to discover aspects of themselves that had been long buried. Authentic desires, forgotten dreams, new visions. They begin to hear the call of the soul, which was always there, but drowned out by the noise of identity. Rebirth does not happen in the light. It begins in the dark, in solitude, in silence, in surrender. The old self must fall apart for the deeper self to come forward. This is not just a psychological shift, it is a spiritual one. Isolation marks the initiation into a new phase of life, one where identity is no longer constructed by outer forces, but discovered from within. It is not the end, it is the beginning of authenticity. The journey toward wholeness often starts when we are separated from others. This is the call to become who you truly are. For most people, the self is not something that is discovered in isolation, but reflected in relationship. We come to know ourselves, or so we believe, through interaction, how others respond to us, but these reflections are not always accurate. They are distorted by societal norms, family conditioning, trauma, and unspoken cultural narratives. As a result, we often mistake adaptation for identity. We become so used to performing the version of ourselves that pleases others or keeps us safe that we forget to ask if that version is true. When life removes us from others, whether through physical separation, emotional disconnection, or existential rupture, it may feel like abandonment. But what if it is an invitation? What if, in the absence of constant mirroring, we are finally able to see ourselves without distortion? This is the beginning of individuation, the process by which a person begins to unify the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche into a more authentic whole. It cannot happen in the noise of conformity. It demands silence. It demands solitude. It demands the courage to walk a path that no one else can walk for us. Wholeness is not the same as perfection. It is not about fixing yourself, improving yourself, or becoming better in the eyes of others. It is about becoming real. That means embracing both light and shadow, both strength and vulnerability, both clarity and confusion. In order to do that, one must first turn inward, and that inward turn often begins with separation. When you are alone, when the roles fall away, when no one is there to affirm or define you, you are left with yourself, and that is where the real journey begins. This process can feel like a stripping down, a kind of psychological nakedness. You may find that things you once valued no longer hold meaning. You may question long-held beliefs, feel unmoored from your past, or find your motivations unclear. This uncertainty is not a mistake. It is part of the process. The false self is dissolving, and the true self has not yet fully emerged. You're in the space between stories, and in that space, you are not lost. You are being reformed. The path to wholeness is deeply personal. No one can walk it for you, but those who have walked it before will tell you. It begins with a breaking, a separation, a descent into the unknown. It begins when you are pulled away from the familiar, when you are forced to rely not on outer direction but on inner knowing. In this place, you begin to encounter the deeper layers of your psyche, your longings, your fears, your truths. You begin to recognize that wholeness does not lie in being everything to everyone, but in being fully yourself. When you are isolated, you are not being exiled from the world. You are being invited to meet yourself, perhaps for the first time. You are being offered the chance to become whole, not by adding more, but by peeling away everything that is not truly you. The solitude is not a void, it is a mirror, and in that mirror you will begin to recognize the face beneath the masks, the voice beneath the noise, the soul beneath the story. The silence of isolation allows the voice of the soul to emerge, a voice often drowned out by the demands of modern life. In the constant hum of daily existence, we are bombarded with input, notifications, conversations, obligations, news, deadlines, all demand our attention and fragment our awareness. This external noise becomes so familiar, so normalized, that many never realize how little of their day is spent in genuine presence with themselves. In this chaos, the soul, the innermost essence of who we are, is rarely heard. It speaks softly, subtly, and not in language made for efficiency or productivity. It doesn't shout, it waits. When the world around us falls silent, the shift is jarring. What once felt like a lifeline, constant interaction, validation, stimulation, now reveals itself as a veil. As we sit alone, the initial response might be discomfort. The silence can feel suffocating, empty, meaningless. But over time, as the mind begins to settle, something else begins to rise. Beneath the habitual thoughts and anxieties, there is another layer, quieter, deeper, more enduring. It is not interested in appearance or status. It does not care about approval or achievement. It seeks only truth, alignment, and authenticity. This is the voice of the soul. It is in isolation that this voice becomes audible, not because it has suddenly appeared, but because it has finally been given space to speak. You might notice it first as an intuition, a sense of being pulled towards something you had forgotten or never dared to pursue. You might feel a longing, not for a person or a place, but for a part of yourself that has been neglected. Or you may be flooded with emotions you cannot immediately name, memories that surface seemingly out of nowhere, or creative ideas that feel like they come from another place entirely. These are expressions of the soul. The soul does not speak in straight lines. It speaks in symbols, images, moods, and dreams. It communicates through the body, the heart, and the imagination. In silence, you begin to develop a different kind of listening, a listening that is less about information and more about resonance. You start to ask different questions. What nourishes me? What feels meaningful? What have I forgotten that once mattered deeply? What am I pretending not to know? These questions are not answered quickly, but they are answered truly, and only in silence can they fully be heard. Modern life rarely makes space for this kind of listening. It teaches us to override our internal signals, to numb pain, to ignore intuition, to measure worth through output. That is why isolation, though painful at first, is such a profound gift. It creates a rupture in the pattern. It removes the outer distractions and forces a confrontation with the inner world. And in that confrontation, the soul steps forward, not as a concept or a philosophy, but as a presence, a knowing, a guide. This voice may ask you to slow down when the world tells you to speed up. It may ask you to let go when others say to hold on. It may ask you to walk away from something that looks perfect on the outside but feels hollow within. Listening to the soul requires courage because it will often lead you into unfamiliar terrain, but it is only by following it that you begin to build a life rooted not in performance, but in purpose, not in survival, but in truth. So, if you find yourself alone right now, estranged, misunderstood, detached from the world you once knew, don't despair. This is not the end of your story, but the sacred beginning of your transformation. You are not being punished, you are being prepared. The pain is real, yes, but so is the rebirth it carries. Isolation is the universe's way of stripping away the noise so you can finally hear the truth of who you are and who you are becoming. So, embrace the silence, let the masks fall, meet the self beneath the surface, for in the quiet, the soul begins to speak, and what it has to say will change everything.